The galaxy had forgotten about humans. It was not a sudden thing. It happened slowly, over 300 years, like a river wearing down a stone. When humanity first joined the Galactic Concord, they were fierce. They were hungry. They had crawled out of their small blue planet at the edge of nowhere and demanded a seat at the table with species that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. The elder races had laughed at first. Humans were so young, so fragile. They lived for less than a century. Their bodies were soft, and they came from a world that was trying to kill them every single day. What could such creatures possibly offer to a coalition that had mastered faster than light travel before humans had even discovered fire? Then, the HFY War happened. The HFY were a nightmare species. They moved like insects, thought like a hive, and consumed everything in their path. For 200 years, they had pushed against the borders of the Concord, taking world after world. The elder races fought back with their advanced weapons and their perfect tactics, but the HFY kept coming. They did not feel fear. They did not negotiate. They only consumed. When the HFY broke through the defensive line at Carthax VII, everyone expected the Concord to fall. The Dralith pulled back their fleet. The Nelthari began evacuating their colonies. Even the ancient Vethkai, who had helped found the Concord 12,000 years ago, started making plans to flee to another galaxy. But the humans did not run. 30,000 Terran Marines landed on Carthax VII and told the HFY that they would not take one more step. The battle lasted for 3 weeks. When it was over, only 4,000 Marines walked off that planet. But the HFY advance had stopped. For the first time in 2 centuries, the hive had been pushed back. The war lasted another 50 years after that. Humans fought in every major battle. They died in numbers that made the elder races uncomfortable. But they never stopped. They never ran. And when the final HFY hive ship was destroyed over the burning skies of their homeworld, it was a human admiral who gave the order to fire. That was 200 years ago. Now, in the year 2847 by Earth's calendar, humanity had become a footnote. The Concord had grown comfortable in the long peace. The elder races rebuilt their fleets with new technology. They expanded their territories. They wrote long histories about the HFY War and how the Great Coalition had defeated the hive menace. The humans were mentioned, of course. They were called brave, honorable. A fine example of what young species could achieve when guided by their elders. The truth was simpler and crueler. The humans had been useful once. Now they were not needed anymore. Ambassador Katie Moreno sat in the back row of the Concord Assembly Hall and tried not to let her anger show on her face. She was 42 years old, a career diplomat who had spent her entire adult life representing Earth to the galaxy. She had learned to smile when the Dralith called humans charming. She had learned to nod politely when the Nelthari talked about humanity's potential. She had learned to pretend that she did not. Notice the way other species looked at her delegation like they were children who had wandered into an adult conversation. Today, the assembly was discussing fleet deployments for the outer territories. The Dralith representative, a tall being with silver skin and eyes like polished stones, was explaining why human ships should be reassigned from patrol duty to cargo transport. The Terran vessels are of an older design, he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. They serve the Concord best in support roles. We mean no disrespect to our honored ancestors of the Coalition. Honored ancestors. Katie had heard that phrase 100 times. It meant relics. It meant fossils. It meant, thank you for your service. Now please sit down and let the real powers handle things. She thought about her grandfather, who had served on Carthax VII. He had told her stories when she was a little girl. Stories about holding the line when everyone else had fled. Stories about what it meant to be human in a galaxy that wanted to forget them. But those were just stories now. Old legends that nobody believed anymore. The emergency signal came without warning. Every screen in the assembly hall turned red. Every speaker crackled with static. And then a voice came through, speaking in the clicking language of the Vethkai, translated instantly into 100 different tongues. This is Colony Ashteril. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Ships bearing HFY markings have entered our system. This is not a drill. This is not a mistake. The HFY have returned. Please send help. Please. There are 2 million of us here. We have no weapons. We have no ships. Please. The message repeated 3 times and then went silent. For a long moment, nobody in the assembly moved. The HFY were supposed to be extinct. They had been wiped out 200 years ago. Every history book said so. Every military report confirmed it. But the HFY did not lie. They were incapable of it. The Dralith representative was the first to speak. We must mobilize immediately. The HFY are founding members of this Concord. We will not abandon them. Within hours, the greatest fleet in Concord history was assembled. 17 species sent their finest warships. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons. Cruisers bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Fighters that moved faster than light itself. Humanity sent what it had. The carrier, Endurance. A ship that was older than most of its crew. 300 Marines under the command of Colonel Danny Vance. 4 landing craft that had been patched and repaired so many times that almost nothing original remained. When the human contingent arrived at the staging area, a young Nelthari officer looked at the Endurance and asked, genuinely confused, if it was a museum ship. Colonel Vance just smiled and said nothing. The fleet jumped to Ashtarol and found exactly what the distress call had promised. HFY ships filled the sky like a swarm of locusts. They were different from the old records. Bigger. Faster. Their weapons cut through Concord shields like they were made of paper. The first wave of the attack killed 3,000 Concord soldiers in less than 10 minutes. Admiral Torvax of the Dralith watched his tactical display turn red with warnings. He was 800 years old. He had commanded 100 battles. He had never seen anything like this. All ships, he said, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame. Retreat to the Nelthari system. We must regroup. We must plan. One by one, the great ships of the Concord turned and fled, all except one. Colonel Danny Vance stood on the bridge of the Endurance and watched the Concord fleet run away. He was 53 years old. His hair had gone gray 10 years ago. His knees hurt when it rained, and his back had never been the same since a training accident when he was 25. He had spent his entire career in the Terran Marine Corps, and in all those years, he had never fired a shot in real combat. The galaxy had been at peace his whole life. Humans were not needed for war anymore. They were needed for ceremonies, for parades, for standing in the background, while the elder races made speeches about how wonderful the Concord was. Danny had trained anyway, every day for 30 years. He had made his Marines train too. They had laughed at him sometimes, behind his back. They had called him the old man who was preparing for a war that would never come. They were not laughing now. Colonel, said Lieutenant Commander Amy Lawson from her station at the tactical display. She was 28, smart as a whip, and she had never looked as scared as she did right now. Admiral Torvax is ordering all ships to retreat to the Nelthari system. He is specifically requesting our compliance. Danny looked at the display. The HFY ships were everywhere, swarming around the planet like flies around a corpse. Below them, on the surface of Ashtarol, 2 million HFY were waiting to die. The HFY were not fighters. They had not been fighters for 10,000 years. They were scholars, artists, keepers of the Concord's history. They had great libraries filled with the knowledge of 100 civilizations. They had museums that held treasures from before humanity had learned to walk upright. And they had children. Millions of children who would never grow up if someone did not do something. What is our drop capacity? Danny asked. Captain Ben Hardy stepped forward. He was the Marine Company commander, a big man with hands like shovels, and a voice that could carry across a battlefield. 300 Marines, sir. Full combat load. We have 4 landing craft and enough ammunition for maybe 6 hours of heavy fighting. How many HFY on the ground? 15,000 at least. More landing every minute. The bridge went quiet. Everyone could do the math. 300 against 15,000. It was not a battle. It was a death sentence. Danny thought about his daughter. Her name was Emma, and she was 7 years old. She had his eyes and her mother's smile. Every night before bed, she asked him to tell her stories about the brave Terran Marines who had saved the galaxy a long time ago. He always told her the same thing. Those Marines were not special. They were just ordinary people who decided that some things were worth dying for. He wondered if she would understand what he was about to do. "Open a channel to the Endurance crew," he said. "All hands." Amy pressed a button. "Channel open, sir." Danny took a breath. "This is Colonel Vance. By now you have all seen what is happening. The Concorde fleet is retreating. Admiral Torvax has ordered us to go with them. I am about to disobey that order." He paused. On the screens around him, he could see the faces of his crew. Young men and women. Kids. Really. Most of them had joined the military because it was safe. Because it was a good job with good benefits and you would never have to actually fight. "There are 2 million people on that planet," Danny continued. "They have no weapons. They have no ships. They have nothing but the hope that someone will come and save them. The Concorde has decided that they are not worth saving. I have decided differently." He looked at Captain Hardy, who nodded slowly. "I am taking this ship into that fight. I am asking for volunteers to drop with me. If you want to leave, there is a shuttle heading to the Dralith flagship in 10 minutes. No one will blame you. No one will judge you. Your records will stay clean. But if you stay, I need you to understand something. We are probably not coming back. The numbers are against us. The odds are impossible. We are going to fly into that fire, and we are going to burn." He stopped. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the engines. "But here is what I know. I know that 200 years ago, our great-grandparents stood on a planet called Carthax VII and told the galaxy that humans do not run. I know that somewhere down there, right now, there are children who are scared and crying and waiting for someone to help them. And I know that I did not spend 40 years wearing this uniform so I could run away when it finally mattered." He closed the channel and waited. 10 minutes passed. The shuttle to the Dralith flagship powered up its engines. It sat on the landing pad, ready to take anyone who wanted to leave. Nobody came. Not a single Marine. Not a single crew member. Not even the cooks or the janitors or the 17-year-old kid who had joined the military because his parents could not afford to send him to college. They all stayed. Amy turned to Danny with tears in her eyes. "Sir, the shuttle pilot is requesting orders." Danny smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "Tell him to power down. We are going to need that shuttle." The Endurance turned toward Ashteril. Its old engines roared to life, pushing the ancient ship faster than it had moved in years. Behind them, the Concorde fleet watched in confusion as the single human carrier broke formation and headed straight for the enemy. Admiral Torvax opened a communication channel. His silver face filled the main screen. His stone eyes wide with something that might have been disbelief. "Colonel Vance, what are you doing? I ordered a full retreat. You are flying directly into the Kethvari blockade. You will be destroyed." Danny looked at the Admiral. For 800 years, this being had commanded great fleets and won great victories. He had probably never been disobeyed in his entire long life. "Admiral," Danny said, his voice calm and steady, "with all due respect, you can take your retreat order and put it somewhere uncomfortable. There are people down there who need help, and I intend to help them." He cut the channel before Torvax could respond. The Endurance hit the atmosphere of Ashteril like a meteor. Kethvari fighters swarmed around it, firing weapons that scored the old ship's hull. The point defense guns roared back, filling the sky with hot metal. 2 fighters went down, then 3, then 10. The ship shook like it was going to fall apart. Warning alarms screamed from every console. A fire broke out in the engine room, and the damage control team put it out with 30 seconds to spare. But the Endurance kept flying. And in its belly, 300 Marines checked their weapons and said their prayers and prepared to do something impossible. They were going to hold the line. Just like their great-grandparents had done 200 years ago. On a planet that most of the galaxy had forgotten, the landing craft dropped from the carrier's hangar bay and fell toward the surface like stones. Above them, the Endurance turned to face the Kethvari fleet alone, its guns blazing, buying time with its own death. The battle for Ashteril had begun. The landing craft hit the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. Sergeant Lisa Tran was the first one out of the door. She was 31 years old, born in a small town in Texas, and she had joined the Marines because her father and his father and his father before him had all been Marines. Her family had a tradition. When things got bad, the Trans showed up. Things had never been this bad. The air outside was thick with ash and smoke. The ground was black volcanic rock, sharp enough to cut through boot leather if you stepped wrong. In the distance, the Vethkai shelter complex rose from the dead earth like a metal flower. Its walls built to keep out the volcanic gases that sometimes leaked from the planet's core. It had never been built to keep out an army. "Perimeter secure," Lisa called out, sweeping her rifle across the burned landscape. For now, Colonel Vance was out of his landing craft 30 seconds later. He moved fast for an old man. His eyes scanned the terrain, taking in every rock and ridge and shadow that might hide an enemy. "Hardy, take 2nd platoon and set up a defensive line at that ridge. Tran, your squad has point. We are moving toward the shelter complex. The Kethvari will find us soon. I want us dug in before they do." The Marines moved like water flowing downhill. No wasted motion. No hesitation. They had trained for this their whole lives. Even when everyone told them that training was pointless, now that training was the only thing keeping them alive. Lisa led her squad through a narrow canyon, her boots crunching on the black sand. Behind her, Private Tyler Dunn carried the heavy machine gun like it weighed nothing. He was 22, built like a truck, and he had the kind of quiet courage that did not show until everything went wrong. The first Kethvari patrol found them 40 minutes after landing. Lisa saw them first. 6 of them, moving along the ridge above the canyon. They were tall, almost 8 feet, with bodies covered in hard black shells like beetles. Their eyes were clusters of red lights that never blinked. Their hands ended in claws that could tear through metal. She held up a fist. Her squad froze. The Kethvari had not seen them yet. They were scanning the horizon, looking for the human landing site. They moved with a strange coordination, like they were all part of the same body. Lisa had read about this in the old war records. The Kethvari shared a hive mind. What one of them saw, they all saw. What one of them thought, they all thought. It made them fast. It made them deadly. It made them almost impossible to surprise. Almost. She pointed at Tyler and then at the ridge. He understood immediately. He set up the heavy machine gun behind a rock, bracing it against his shoulder. Lisa raised 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The canyon exploded with gunfire. The heavy machine gun roared like a dragon. The first 3 Kethvari went down before they even knew what was happening. The other 3 turned to fight, their claws raised, their mouths opening to make sounds that humans could not hear. Lisa put 2 rounds through the nearest one's head. It dropped like a puppet with cut strings. 12 seconds later, all 6 Kethvari were dead. But Lisa knew that the hive had seen everything. Somewhere out there, 15,000 Kethvari now knew exactly where the humans were. "Move," she said. Fast. They reached the defensive line just as the first wave hit. The Kethvari came out of the smoke like a black tide. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, running across the volcanic rock with a speed that should have been impossible for creatures their size. They did not scream. They did not make any sound at all. They just came, silent and terrible, with death in their red eyes. Colonel Vance stood at the center of the line, his rifle in his hands. "Hold your fire until they reach the markers. Make every shot count. We do not have ammunition to waste." The Marines waited. The Kethvari got closer. 200 meters. 100 meters. 50. Fire. The defensive line lit up like the surface of a star. Tracers cut through the smoke. Grenades exploded in the middle of Kethvari formations. Bodies fell, stumbled, and were trampled by the ones behind. But the Kethvari kept coming. They hit the line like a wave hitting a seawall. For a terrible moment, everything was chaos. Claws and guns and screaming and blood. A Marine named Rodriguez went down with 3 HFY on top of him. His squadmate, a woman named Chen, killed all 3 and pulled him to safety. He had lost an arm, but he was still alive. Somehow, impossibly, the line held. The first attack lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, 300 HFY bodies littered the ground in front of the human position. The Marines had lost 11 dead and 20 wounded, but there was no time to rest. The second wave was already forming in the distance. For 6 hours, the HFY came. Wave after wave after wave. The Marines fell back in stages, giving ground slowly, making the enemy pay for every meter in blood. It was not a battle they could win. They all knew that. It was a battle to buy time. Tyler Dunn made his stand at a narrow pass between 2 volcanic ridges. His heavy machine gun was running low on ammunition, and his squad had been ordered to fall back. He stayed behind. "Someone has to hold this pass," he said when Lisa tried to argue. "Get the wounded out. I will catch up." He did not catch up. But he held that pass for 15 minutes alone, killing over 70 HFY before they finally brought him down. 37 Marines made it to safety because of those 15 minutes. Staff Sergeant Megan Cole led a counterattack through a collapsed tunnel when the HFY tried to flank the main defensive line. She and her squad emerged behind enemy lines and caused so much chaos that the flank attack fell apart completely. Half her squad did not make it back. She carried the last survivor on her shoulders for 2 kilometers. When the sun set on Ashtarol, the Marines had reached the shelter complex. Of the 300 who had landed, 212 were still able to fight. The rest were dead or too badly wounded to hold a weapon. Colonel Vance looked at the massive doors of the shelter. Behind them, 2 million Vethkai were waiting. "Get those doors open," he said. "We are going to make our stand here." The doors opened, and for the first time, the humans came face to face with the people they were dying to save. The Vethkai looked like tall, delicate insects. Their bodies were covered in shimmering scales that changed color with their emotions. Their eyes were large and dark and filled with a fear that needed no translation. They had been listening to the battle on their sensors. They had heard the gunfire and the explosions and the screams. They had watched 200 of their would-be rescuers die in the volcanic wasteland, and still the humans had come. One of the Vethkai elders stepped forward. Her name was Keitha Ral, and she had lived for 300 years. She had seen many things in her long life. She had never seen anything like this. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you not run like the others?" Colonel Vance was reloading his rifle. His hands were steady, even though he had not slept in 30 hours. "Because someone had to stay," he said. "And we were the only ones who would." The shelter was never meant to be a fortress. It was designed to protect the Vethkai from volcanic gases and radiation storms. The walls were thick, but they were not made to stop weapons. The doors were heavy, but they could not hold back an army forever. There were no gun positions, no defensive barriers, no kill zones. The Marines built them anyway. For 3 hours, while the HFY regrouped outside, the humans worked like they had never worked before. They tore apart storage containers to make barricades. They ripped cables from the walls to create tripwires. They turned a peaceful shelter into a death trap for anything that tried to come through those doors. Private First Class Katie Simmons was 19 years old, and she had never been so tired in her life. Her hands were bleeding from moving metal panels. Her back ached from lifting sandbags that the Vethkai had stored for flood control. But she did not stop. None of them stopped. Beside her, an old Vethkai male watched with his dark, unblinking eyes. His name was Yentho, and he had been an engineer before he retired 200 years ago. He did not understand what the humans were doing, but he wanted to help. "Show me," he said through his translator. "I can learn." Katie handed him a piece of metal. "Hold this against the wall. I need to weld it in place." The Vethkai had never built a weapon in their lives. Their culture had abandoned violence 10,000 years ago. They solved problems with knowledge and patience and time. The idea of killing another living being was almost impossible for them to understand, but they could hold things. They could carry supplies. They could mix the chemical compounds that the Marines used for explosives, and so they helped, in their own way, to build the defenses that might save their children. Colonel Vance found Kitharal in the central chamber of the shelter, surrounded by young Vethkai who clung to her like frightened children. "We need to talk," he said. The elder Vethkai rose and followed him to a quiet corner. Her scales had turned a pale blue, which Danny had learned meant deep sadness. "Your soldiers are dying for us," she said. "I do not understand why." Danny leaned against the wall. He was so tired that standing upright felt like lifting a mountain. "I have a daughter back on Earth. Her name is Emma. She is 7 years old." Kitharal tilted her head. "You have offspring. This is important to your species. Yes?" "Yes." Danny looked at the Vethkai children huddled in the center of the room. Some of them were very young, barely old enough to walk. They reminded him of Emma. "Someday, my daughter is going to learn about this day in school. She is going to read about the Battle of Ashtaral in her history books." "And what do you want her to read?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. "I want her to read that when it mattered. When it really mattered. Her people did not run. I want her to know that being human means standing up for what is right, even when it costs you everything." He shrugged. "Maybe that does not make sense to you. Maybe it is not logical. But it is who we are." Kitharal's scales shifted to a deep purple. Danny did not know what that color meant, but her voice was soft when she spoke again. 300 years ago, when your species first joined the Concord, we thought you were strange, violent, unpredictable. We did not understand why you were so eager to fight, so willing to die. We called you young and foolish." She reached out and touched his arm. Her fingers were cool and gentle. "We were wrong. You are not foolish. You are brave, in a way that we have forgotten how to be." The attack came at midnight. The Kethvari did not bother with tactics this time. They simply came, all of them, a black wave of claws and teeth and death. They smashed against the shelter doors like a storm hitting a cliff. The metal groaned, the hinges screamed, and then the doors came down. The first wave of Kethvari died in the kill zone that the Marines had built. Explosives tore them apart. Gunfire cut them down. Bodies piled up so high that the ones behind had to climb over their dead to keep advancing. But they kept coming. They always kept coming. Sergeant Lisa Tran took a plasma round to her left shoulder. It burned through her armor and cooked the flesh beneath. She screamed once, switched her rifle to her right hand, and kept firing. Later, she would not remember doing it. Later, the medics would tell her that she had killed 47 Kethvari with one working arm. Captain Ben Hardy led a counterattack when the eastern barricade started to fall. He gathered every Marine who could still stand and pushed the Kethvari back with nothing but rifles and fury. When a Kethvari warrior got close enough to grab him, he pulled a grenade and held on until it exploded. The blast killed the warrior, collapsed the tunnel behind it, and buried Hardy under a ton of rock. They dug him out 3 hours later. He was still alive. Somehow. He asked if his Marines were okay before he passed out. By dawn, the shelter floor was covered in blood. Human blood. Kethvari blood. It mixed together until you could not tell which was which. 106 Marines were still standing. The others were dead or too wounded to fight. They had killed over 3,000 Kethvari, an impossible number. A ratio that would be studied in military academies for centuries, but it was not enough. It could never be enough. Outside the shelter, 10,000 more Kethvari were gathering for the final push. Colonel Vance gathered his remaining soldiers in a small room near the main entrance. They looked like ghosts. Pale, bloody, exhausted beyond words. But they were still standing. They were still ready. "I am not going to lie to you," Danny said. "We are out of ammunition. We are out of options. We are out of time." He looked at each of them, one by one. Lisa Tran with her burned shoulder. Megan Cole with blood on her face that might not be her own. Katie Simmons, who had turned from a scared teenager into a hardened soldier in a single night. "But we are not out of fight. Not yet." He reached down and drew his combat knife. It was old, worn, and very sharp. His grandfather had carried it on Carthax VII, 200 years ago. Fix bayonets. The order passed down the line. One by one, the Marines attached their blades to their empty rifles. The sound of clicking metal filled the room like a prayer. Outside, the HFY began to move. 10,000 warriors, ready to finish what they had started. Inside, 106 humans stood in a line and prepared to meet them with nothing but steel and courage, and the stubborn refusal to give up that had defined their species since they first crawled out of the caves. Lisa Tran looked at the man next to her, a young private whose name she had never learned. He was shaking so hard that his bayonet rattled. "Hey," she said. "What is your name?" "Martinez," he whispered. "Okay, Chris Martinez. Stay close to me. When they come through that door, you stick that blade in the first thing that moves." "Can you do that?" He nodded. His shaking stopped. "Good." Lisa turned to face the entrance. "Then let us show these bugs what humans are made of." The sky split open with light. Private Chris Martinez saw it first. He was standing at the barricade. His bayonet pointed at the darkness where 10,000 HFY were about to pour through. And suddenly, the whole world turned white. "What the hell?" someone shouted. Colonel Vance ran to the nearest window. Above Ash Terrell, the blackness of space was filled with ships. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel like stars falling from heaven. Their weapons already firing. Their engines burning bright. The Concorde fleet had returned. On the bridge of the Drelith flagship, Admiral Torvax watched as his ships tore through the HFY blockade. The enemy vessels, caught between the planet and the Allied armada, tried to scatter. They did not get far. Drelith dreadnoughts cut them apart with beams of pure energy. Nelthari cruisers hunted down the survivors. Even the peaceful Veth Kai had sent ships, retrofitted cargo haulers with weapons strapped to their hulls, crewed by scholars and artists who had never fired a gun in their lives. Everyone had come. Every species in the Concorde. Every ship that could fly. Ambassador Katie Moreno stood beside the Admiral, her hands gripping the railing so hard that her knuckles had turned white. She had spent the last 12 hours screaming at every representative in the Concorde Assembly. She had begged. She had threatened. She had told them, in words that diplomats were not supposed to use, that if they let her people die alone on that planet, she would personally make sure that humanity remembered it forever. She had not expected it to work. She had expected to watch her people die on a sensor screen while the galaxy looked away. But something had changed. The recordings of the human landing, the images of 300 Marines flying into the fire while everyone else fled, had spread across the Concorde like a virus. Species that had not thought about humans in generations suddenly remembered the old stories. The last stand at Carthax VII. The 40-year war against the Hive. The price that humanity had paid to earn its place among the stars. They remembered that humans did not run. And for the first time in 200 years, the elder races felt something that they had forgotten how to feel. Shame. The ground battle was over in less than an hour. Concorde dropships landed by the thousands, pouring soldiers into the volcanic wasteland around the shelter. The HFY, caught between the human defenders and the Allied reinforcements, were destroyed completely. Not a single one survived. When the doors of the shelter finally opened for real, the first thing the Concorde soldiers saw was a line of 106 humans standing at the entrance. They were covered in blood and ash. Their rifles were empty. Their bayonets were fixed. They had been 30 seconds from a final charge against 10,000 enemies, 30 seconds from certain death, and they were still standing. Colonel Danny Vance stepped forward as Admiral Torvax approached. The old Marine was barely on his feet. He had not slept in 2 days. He had a cut on his forehead that was going to need stitches, and his left hand was wrapped in a bloody bandage that hid 2 missing fingers. He snapped a salute anyway. "Sir." "The civilians are secure." Torvax stopped in front of him. The Drelith Admiral had lived for 800 years. He had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. He had commanded fleets that numbered in the millions. He had won battles that shaped the history of the galaxy. He had never felt as small as he did in that moment. "Colonel Vance," he said, and his voice was not steady. "I ordered you to retreat. You disobeyed." "Yes, sir. You took 300 soldiers against 15,000. You held this position for over 20 hours. You saved 2 million lives." Torvax paused. His stone eyes, which had never shown emotion in 8 centuries, were wet. "I called your species old legends, relics of a forgotten war. I was a fool." He reached up and removed the medal from his own chest. It was the Star of the Concord, the highest honor that any being could receive. In 12,000 years, it had been awarded only 17 times. He pinned it to Danny Vance's torn and bloody uniform. "The Concord owes you a debt that can never be repaid. But we will try. For as long as this alliance exists, what you did here will be remembered." Danny looked down at the medal. It was heavy. Heavier than he expected. "With respect, Admiral, I did not do anything special. I just did what humans do." In the weeks that followed, the story of Ashterel spread across the galaxy. Every news network, every historian, every child, in every school, on every planet, heard about the 300. They learned about Tyler Dunn, who held a canyon pass alone so his friends could escape. They learned about Ben Hardy, who buried himself to save his Marines. They learned about Lisa Tran, who kept fighting with one arm and never stopped. Songs were written. Monuments were planned. And in the halls of the Concord Assembly, the human delegation no longer sat in the back rows. They sat in the front. Colonel Danny Vance returned to Earth 3 months later. He had turned down promotions and awards and offers to speak at military academies across 100 worlds. He just wanted to go home. His daughter was waiting for him at the spaceport. She was 8 now, a year older than when he had left. She had his eyes and her mother's smile. And when she saw him, she broke away from her mother and ran across the landing pad as fast as her legs could carry her. Danny caught her and held her so tight that he was afraid he might break her. But she just laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Daddy," she said, "my teacher says you are a legend now." Danny laughed. It was a tired laugh, but it was real. "Sweetheart, I am just a soldier. But I will tell you a secret." He leaned close and whispered in her ear. "Humans have always been legends. We just keep forgetting to remind the galaxy." Emma pulled back and looked at him with serious eyes. "Will you have to go away again? Will you have to fight more bad guys?" Danny thought about the answer for a long time. He thought about the Marines who had died on Ashterel. He thought about the Vethkai children who would grow up because of what they had done. He thought about the look on Admiral Torvax's face when he finally understood what humans really were. "I do not know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "But if I do, I will come back. I promise." In the Concord archives, a new entry was added to humanity's record. It replaced the old one, the one that called them honored ancestors of the Coalition, the polite words that really meant fossils and relics, and things that used to matter. The new entry was short. It was simple, and it would be remembered for the rest of time. When the fire came, the Terrans did not flee. They entered it, and they burned brighter than anyone believed possible. Let this be remembered. The humans are not old legends. They are the legend that never ends. And somewhere in the galaxy, on a volcanic world called Ashterel, a monument stood in front of a shelter that had almost become a grave. It listed 194 names. The humans who had died so that others could live. At the bottom, carved in stone that would last for 1,000,000 years, were 3 words. They did not run.